Archbishop Beltran and I met with the local bishop of the Diocese of Sololá to speak about the possibility of canonization of Blessed Stanley. The diocese in which someone dies is the diocese that has jurisdiction for causes of canonization. And causes have to be initiated within 30 years of the death of the person. Otherwise, it becomes a historical case, and it's a very different type of case, because you don't want to wait for all the potential negative witnesses to die off. And so this was the 25th anniversary, and it was very clear that the Diocese of Sololá Chimaltenango was not in a position to pursue the cause of Blessed Stanley. It's an expensive thing in the first place, but the bishop, Raul Martinez, was more than willing for us to do it. And so through Archbishop Beltran's initiative, the Guatemala Bishops' Conference was consulted, and they approved for the transfer of jurisdiction to Oklahoma City. And of course, the USCCB has got to approve the causes as well. So we owe a great deal of debt to Archbishop Beltran. This would not have happened if it wasn't for him. We began it in the 25th year after Father Rother's death. I am not sure exactly why I was the one chosen to be the Episcopal delegate for the cause, which would give me the role of kind of organizing how we're going to go about things. But it is true that I've had a long connection with the parish, and so it was probably a good choice for that. A couple of details. The young man who had been forced by the assassins to lead them to where Father Rother was staying, Francisco Bosel, they were able to spirit him out of the country because his life was at risk as an eyewitness to this event. And he stayed with me in the rectory. In those days, you could still do that. He stayed with me in the rectory at Sacred Heart Parish here in Oklahoma City because I could speak Spanish, and until I was able to get him connected with a local family in the parish for him to be in a safe place. So right from the time of Father Rother's death, I was connected. Of course, I visited down there in 3 times in the 1980s, and then there was Tropical Storm Stan, and I was involved in the relief effort following the mudslides when 600 people were killed and all of that. And in that, my right-hand man was Felipe Coche Pablo, who became my right-hand man for the cause of canonization. So just a little bit of an idea of what we needed to prove. There's 2 types of causes of canonization. There's heroic virtue and martyrdom. Heroic virtue, you have to show that the person is heroically virtuous. And then we'd have to have a miracle to show that they've got access to the Lord, and then another miracle for canonization. For martyrdom, you have to show that the person was killed out of hatred for the faith. Okay? And so it's no good that he gets killed when somebody tried to rob the rectory, or the assassins think that he's a communist, or whatever. He's got to be killed out of hatred for the faith to be qualified as a martyr. And so that's what we needed to prove. So the first step is to get Blessed Stanley declared to be a servant of God. And so with the help of Felipe, I developed a list of about a little over 100 potential witnesses. I wrote up a brief biography of the basic facts of his life and death, and appended to it a list of witnesses. And we sent that to Rome. Rome approved it, and he was declared a servant of God. Once he's named a servant of God, that gave us the green light to then proceed. And we developed a tribunal for his cause of canonization that included a historical commission, and in fact, Maria Scaparlanda, who's here somewhere, was show that theologically he was correct, on the church teaching. And I don't know if George Ragazzi's here, but he was on that one, on that commission too. But we enlisted the help of Andrea Ambrosi, who is an expert in causes of canonization in Rome, who was our representative in Rome, and he provided us with very good guidance. Rome is pretty particular about how you proceed with these things, and so I then began the process of interviews. Like I said, we had over 100 names of potential witnesses. About a third of them were English language witnesses in the United States, largely. About a third were Spanish-speaking people from Guatemala or elsewhere, and about a third were Tz'utujil speaking people for elsewhere. And then, I conducted all of the interviews in Guatemala. The interviews we developed a list of 150 questions, and not everyone was asked every question. Like in Guatemala, we didn't ask what facts about Father Brother's childhood, so the questions that would be appropriate. Now Bishop Ed Weisenberger was the promoter of justice. In other words, the devil's advocate. So when we would have the interviews, I would be asking questions, and the role of Bishop Weisenberger was to make sure that everything was according to the way it ought to be, and that if there were awkward questions to be asked, he needed to ask them as the devil's advocate to make sure that this was as honest and clear. The witnesses of the list, we had to include people obvious that we knew would not be that favorable, because it needed to be honest interviews, honest testimony of everybody. So I went to Guatemala on 2 occasions for like 2 weeks at a time, and the way the interviews would go was we would ask the questions, the people and we would audio record their response to the questions. When it was in Tz'utujil, Felipe would ask the questions, and it would be audio recorded. And then we had a team there of, I think it was 4 people. 2 of them were transcribers, so they would write up the exact testimony and the exact words that the person said. And so one of them was a transcriber for the recordings that were in Tz'utujil, and one was a recorder for the ones that were in Spanish. And then you had to translate. Our tribunal would only do its business in English. So for the Tz'utujil interviews, you had a column with the original Tz'utujil in bold, and then the Spanish translation in not bold, and then the English translation of that. So 3 columns. And when it was a Spanish interview, it was just 2 columns, the Spanish and then the English. And I did all of the Spanish to English translations. So we would go and meet with the witness, or have the witness come to us, depending. These had to be confidential. Everyone was sworn to secrecy and sworn to tell the truth, nothing but the truth. And so some of the interviews would be at a neutral place at the church, where we could be assured that there was no one like listening in to it. Sometimes the witnesses were too weak physically. We did the Guatemala interviews first because those witnesses tended to be more fragile, and so some of them were very fragile, in fact. They would come in for the interviews. We would record it. We would transcribe it. Then we would meet back with them read to them what we had recorded. And then they would be able to correct anything that was wrong, or something that they would rather have phrased differently, or whatever. And when they approved of what their testimony said, then they would sign off on it and their testimony. We did that over and over again. had one man, his name was Tomas Yatas, and he had been the head of Catholic Action for the parish, which was in effect their head of their parish council at the time when Blessed Stanley Brother was there. He was actively dying when we came down there, but he wanted to give his testimony. So we went, gave his testimony. The testimony of the ladies was a lot more complete than of the men. So he was on his deathbed, but determined to give testimony. It was only in about 6 pages of testimony, is all his whole thing. We went back, he signed off on it, and all that. He died the following day. He was living to give witness to Blessed Stanley. I have to tell you that there was another witness that of course we did a couple of columns, but we had one witness that was 80 pages. Guess what gender she was? But her testimony was very valuable because she remembered things. And she not only did she remember what was said, what occurred, but also the impact of it on other people, and how different people would have interpreted things. And so it was actually it was a lot of work, but it was also what we needed to hear. So anyway, we did the questions. There were a section of questions on the family of origin, then his schooling, and then his time in seminary, and then some of the witnesses on that topic, and then his time as a priest in Oklahoma, and then his time ministering in Guatemala, and then the facts of his death, and then the effects of his life and death subsequent to his death. And so there's a whole series of questions. There was a whole series of questions on his personal virtues, his prudence, his temperance, his piety, his chastity, all the different things. Because after all, it's no good to be a martyr if you're not also heroically virtuous. If you're leading a lousy life and still get killed for the faith, you might end up in heaven, but we're not going to have you represent as So we, in effect, we had to do all the heroic virtue stuff for him, in addition to all the story, the facts of his martyrdom. The challenge regarding his martyrdom is he was to prove that he was killed out of hatred for the faith. But how do you? But the assassins were never apprehended. So how do you determine whether they had hatred for the faith or not? Okay. Well, the answer to that, and it was convincing to Rome as well, is that we were able to prove the intent of the intellectual authors of the faith, the intent of those who sent the killers to kill him, and that was out of hatred for the faith. We did an extensive history of Maria Scaparlanda did, and I also did work on the history of church-state relations in Guatemala, and it's clear that there was a pattern whereby the church as church was being persecuted. Father Luther was like the 13th person killed in that decade, a priest being killed. And so it was clear that there's that. And there's also a good reason why the assassins were never apprehended. Of course, we don't know that this was how it occurred in this particular instance, but this was how it was usually done. And that is that the army would come across some people who they believed to be guerrillas or the opposition, and the guys would say, no, we love our government. We love the military, and they say we don't believe you. And then the guy said, well, what can we do to prove to you that we're on your side? And then the military would say, well, we've got a dirty task for you to do. And if you do that, we'll know that you're one of ours. And so in order to maybe save their own lives, they go and they kill Father Rother. Well, now, the practice was then to eliminate those killers so that there would be no one to tell the story. And so those who killed Father Rother were likely themselves killed shortly afterwards. And so that is, and we don't know that occurred in this particular instance, but that was what was generally done in those circumstances. And so that would explain why why the witnesses were not apprehended. So when I was named Bishop of Little Rock, there's a period of time between when you're announced and when you take over. For me, it was April 10th was named Bishop of Little Rock, and then was ordained in June. So during that period of time, I went back to Guatemala to tie up all of the Spanish language and Sotho language interviews, and we got them all done. And then I passed the baton on to Father Albert Ruckert, who was a monk of Conception Abbey in Missouri. And so he then did the rest. He took my role, and Bishop Weisenberger continued with his role as promoter of justice. He did the remaining interviews that were in the United States. And then after, so we got all that witness testimony. When I became Bishop of Little Rock, I was transferred to the Historical Commission, and so supported that work. But basically, from that point on, others were doing all this work. But I do know that when it was all said and done, and when the Theological Commission had done their research, the Historical Commission had come up with narrative regarding the history, including regarding church-state relations, we sent that material to Rome, 8,400 pages. And so we sent that to Rome, and to our representative there, Andrea Ambrosi, who reduced all that testimony from 8,400 pages to a little over 1,100 pages, which is still a big book. And that's called a positio. And that positio is then presented to the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, and they review it. It was able to reduce it from 8,400 pages to 1,100 because, as you might expect, many of the testimonies were redundant, because they're recounting the same actions. And so once the point has been made by 2 or 3 people, you don't have to make it for over and over and over again. And so there's the positio. Congregation then reviews that material, and then they contacted me with further questions. And the main further question that they contacted me regarding was the fact that Father Rother had defended himself. How can you be a martyr if you defend yourself? And so, and you can see bruises on his hands and that sort of a thing. And the answer to that is that Father Rother knew, and he said this publicly over and over again, that they were not going to take him alive. And the reason was not that he expected to be able to get out of it, or expected to survive, but rather he was afraid that under torture, because that's what they would do, that under torture he might, in a moment of weakness, say something that would compromise somebody else. And so he was determined that if they came for him, he knew that he was a dead man already, if they came for him. And so that he was resolved that they would not let him take him alive. And so he defended himself, not in an effort to preserve his own life, but rather in an effort to preserve the life of other people who he didn't want to presume that he would be able to hold up in that stress. And with that, the congregation in Rome was convinced, and the green light proceeded for his beatification. So the beatification occurred in 2017 here in Oklahoma City. It was a glorious day, and now as we know, we need a miracle for canonization. Now you might be wondering what's required for a miracle. And you know, your wife stops drinking, that's a miracle. He stops giving her reason to drink. She becomes the saint. Miracle has got to be a medical miracle to qualify. So it's got to be a medical miracle, and you've got to have a verifiable before and a verifiable after, and a cure that for which there is no other explanation. That's the obvious part of it. The less obvious part of it is how are you going to show that this particular saint is the one that got you that favor? When you're praying to Blessed Stanley, but someone over there is praying to Blessed Mother, and you know, ask the Blessed Mother to knock it off for a little while, and let Blessed Stanley do it. You know, so you've got to be able to show a connection between the prayers to the saint and the miracle that was obtained. So generally that occurs pretty quick after. And so that's one of the difficult things about miracles. You might think, well, there's all kinds of claims for miracles. Why aren't they pursuing this particular one? Why aren't they investigating that claim further? And so just to know that it's more than just that something unexplainable has occurred, but rather you got to show a connection as well. So anyway, that's a quick pass through, and hopefully, I think these are some things that you probably will not read anywhere, and so I thought you might find them interesting.
Thank you, Bishop Taylor. That was an insightful and informative look at the immunization cause, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think everyone else in the room did as well. Give you as an appreciation for speaking to us tonight was we made a generous donation to the Stanley Rother Shrine Endowment. And this will allow for the care and operational maintenance of the shrine in perpetuity. So thank you.